Good evening and welcome to the 2017 Public Lecture Series on the Wisconsin Idea, Past and Present. This lecture series is part of a course being taught under the auspices of the Department of Sociology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm Professor Eric Sandgren, a professor at the School of Veterinary Medicine, and I have the honor to serve as the instructor for this course this semester. Students taking this for credit, please remember to sign in. The Wisconsin Idea has always been about more than training students for the workforce. It meant, as Adlai Stevenson once put it, a faith in the application of intelligence and reason to the problems of society. The aspiration to light the way of Wisconsin's citizens and government with the best torches of knowledge and understanding that their university can provide. Accordingly, the lecture series and the course with which it is associated aim to bring students, staff, and faculty in the UW system into a broad conversation with the citizens of the state about how the knowledge produced at the University of Wisconsin has benefited the public in the past and continues to do so today. I encourage you to participate actively through our course website, www.wiscidea.com. The Sociology Department is offering this course with limited resources. If you would like to contribute to the project, please consider making a contribution to the Wisconsin Idea Course UW Foundation Fund. You can do so through the course website. We are fortunate to continue our series tonight with a lecture by Emily Auerbach speaking on The Power to Change Lives, the UW-Odyssey Project. Dr. Auerbach is a professor of English at UW-Madison and serves as project director of the UW-Odyssey Project, a free, life-changing college humanities course for low-income adults. In addition, she is co-host of University of the Air, a one-hour program broadcast statewide on Wisconsin Public Radio featuring interviews with faculties in a variety of disciplines. She's received numerous awards for her work, including a Robert Gard Wisconsin Idea Award. I have to add that when I was an undergraduate here, her father was one of my favorite professors, and I have to say that still, after all of these years, I continue to blame him for all of my quirks. Like all of our speakers, Emily is graciously donating her time and expertise free of charge and out of a commitment to public service. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Emily Auerbach.
Thank you for that nice introduction. And I'm happy to be part of anything that has Wisconsin Idea in the title. It's something that I hold very dear to my heart, that concept that the university is not just to serve traditional undergraduates here in the walls of the campus, but that it really should be serving a much broader audience. I did listen to Gwen's introduction about the Wisconsin Idea and her definition of it as something where governance and economics would be given to more people, not just a few. And I have to ask myself, what about also the riches of the liberal arts and other aspects of what's in a college? Are those reaching the most people? Are we being fair in the distribution of knowledge, arts, and other resources? Also have to ask if Wisconsin is ranked worst in the country in terms of racial inequality. A lot of measures in terms of disproportionately locking up black men, racial achievement gaps in our schools. If that's true, then are we living up to the ideals of the Wisconsin Idea? And so what I'm going to do by talking about the UW-Odyssey Project, I think, is to talk about how I see it as in many ways epitomizing the principles of the Wisconsin Idea, and I'm hoping that every one of you goes out of this room determined to help in some way with a project that is taking off and is changing lives right here in Madison. I'm going to give you a little background on the program and show two short videos, 8 minutes of a documentary that actually, you'll see my father that Eric mentioned in the film, tells the backstory for it, and then also just a 1-minute video of a mother-daughter interview to give you some sense of the students that we're working with. So the background on the UW-Odyssey Project is that my colleague at Wisconsin Public Radio, Jean Faraca, had as a guest on her show Earl Shorris, a reformer and educator who had started something called the Clementi course in the Humanities in New York to test the hypothesis that if you expose low-income adults to great works of philosophy, literature, history, and art, a transformation could take place that would help begin a journey out of poverty. And for that work, Earl Shores won a National Presidential Medal in the Humanities, and program spread in different parts of the country. When Jane had Earl Shores as a guest on her radio show, she became convinced we should start something like it in Madison. And she knew that I was already doing outreach work all over Wisconsin in terms of going to prison, retirement centers, libraries, and having programs that were offered to non-traditional students. What she didn't know is that my parents' background would affect the kind of model that I wanted to use, and that I would want to do something different from the Clementi course. Let me just ask how many of you have heard of Berea College? About half. Okay, so Berea College in Kentucky, and I grew up thinking it was a normal school and that there were lots of them. It wasn't until later that I realized it is a one-of-a-kind. Berea College was designed exclusively for low-income adults. You had to be poor to go there. It was designed mostly for Appalachian youth like my mother, who was born 12 miles outside of Knoxville with no running water. No one in her family had gone to college. She was a hillbilly. She was dirt poor, as she put it. And a teacher who saw that she was an avid reader told her about this school in next door Kentucky where you could attend college for free. And she arrived at that school with a wardrobe that consisted of one skirt and two shirts. And if someone had said at that point, you have to buy a textbook, she would have had to go home. And that fact in her life, and the fact that she actually went around shower stalls collecting little bits of soap to make up a soap bar, because she didn't have spending money to buy a bar of soap, that fact about her life influences why we have an emergency fund with the Odyssey Project, and why when dealing with students who are at the poverty level, we have to think about, can they afford the graduation gown that they're supposed to rent? What about getting inducted into an honor society where there's a fee? What about printer cartridges? So I give you that background because it influences how I think about the Odyssey Project. So Berea is a parochial school. It's a Christian school. My mother was from a Methodist background. But they also decided they needed some diversity. So they had 10% other. And my father was a survivor from Nazi Germany, so he had fled the Holocaust at the age of 10 with his family. And so their story of poverty was that of the immigrant. His parents had been lawyers in Germany. They had had a good life in Berlin, but they lost everything when they fled, and the law practice did not translate. My grandfather and grandmother could not practice law here and didn't have the command of the language or the knowledge of American law. So that's where my parents met, and they were married for 62 years until my mother's death about 5 years ago. And because of their journey through Berea College, and then they went on to Columbia University, got advanced degrees. My father became a professor here on campus, my mother a reference librarian right here in the library nearby. And what I saw is that if you open the door for one person in a family, it can change an entire family and community. So my mother's younger sister went to Berea, became a math teacher. Her daughters went to Mount Holyoke, Wellesley, and Harvard Medical School. Sometimes you open one door and an entire family and neighborhood starts to think about college in a different way. At this point, what I'm going to do is show the first 8 minutes of a 24-minute documentary that was done about our program. And the reason there will be a break where it'll say, coming up next, is because it was designed for broadcast on the Big Ten Network with commercials. And it was originally going to be just an 8-minute segment, but when Katie Sy interviewed my parents, came to class, attended graduation, she couldn't contain it, so they ended up using all 3 of the 8-minute segments. So I'm just going to show the first 8-minute one and encourage you to watch the rest, but I think it will give you a glimpse inside a classroom and a little bit just of the atmosphere.
Coming up on Forward Motion. It's not often a class can change your life, but it happens over and over again here. See the dramatic transformation students make during the Odyssey Project. The seed for this idea was planted decades ago when 2 lives came together at a college for the poor. A generation later, Their path out of poverty inspired their daughter to do the same for others.
I've been redeemed, I've been set free.
And finally, the end of class is just the beginning of the journey. Stay with us. Forward Motion is next. A small library in a low-income neighborhood of Madison, Wisconsin is an unlikely setting for a story of transformation.
It is quite unusual.
That's just a mind explosion.
Every Wednesday evening here, you'll find a university class like few others.
On Wednesday nights, I believe in the American possibility. Freedom to vote was not a part of it. That would have just been assumed.
Very often, the university doesn't make the kind of appearance that it makes here.
There's a lot of experimentation.
The groundbreaking UW-Madison program is called Odyssey.
I am Odyssey, and Odyssey is me.
I didn't know my true self, only my past.
I am that person that is still rising.
If you want to take this journey of education, jump aboard without hesitation.
I can see a better future, apparently, because now I take my life seriously.
I get 30 new students coming in who are scared. They don't know if they're college material. And within a matter of a few months, they're finding a voice.
Well, I be damned.
And then suddenly they're giving opinions, writing editorials, speaking up.
To strengthen the pillars of learning.
They don't look like your typical college students.
You had people from all different walks of life. Everybody wanted to learn, and everybody was eager to listen.
Sexual, eating, drinking, and breeding. Eating, drinking, and breeding.
You got this feeling of a class that was just on fire. They contributed. It was a class that was learning.
At the heart of the Odyssey Project is the belief that education will open doors.
In our educational system today, we are serving the needs of the privileged. We are locking people out.
They've been told you're not college material. Odyssey helps to bring out that voice, that may be buried way down deep.
To get out of poverty, you need to be given opportunity.
Odyssey is a unique opportunity. This year-long humanities course is a gateway into UW-Madison.
It's absolutely a university class. It's just in a place people can get to.
These students are earning 6 credits.
There are times when you simply have to bring what you're doing to where people are.
I had faith that if you gave people Shakespeare and Socrates, Emily Dickinson, Martin Luther King, Walt Whitman, something was going to happen.
But not everyone had faith.
I think there was lots of skepticism.
It took 3 years to raise the money and get the institutional support to start this program.
The tendency has been to think, well, the highfalutin liberal arts really aren't for poor people.
I've run into people who will think that the poor are lazy.
We were the ones that people said didn't want it, couldn't do it. They don't want to read any Shakespeare. Like, what do we want to do?
I was told nobody's going to want to take your class. Poor people don't want to read Plato. You're going to have trouble filling a program.
The reality was quite the opposite.
Within a few weeks of advertising a free college course in the humanities, we had over 100 people applying for those 30 spots. There's a hunger in the community for some kind of access to higher education.
And then we'll wind up with the civil rights movement.
My goal was to try to get into the UW for the fall.
For Billy Kelsey, this was a second chance. She actually started college several decades ago.
I was pretty miserable. I didn't really fit in with anybody. I dropped out. I was homeless for a bit. Just living on people's couches.
Billy raised a son as a single parent.
I was the man of the house for my entire life.
I was pretty poor.
She realized education could be their way out of poverty.
The way that I looked at it was that I have to make things better for him.
We have people struggling with such hardship. I have students who are living in a shelter while trying to read Socrates. They have been hungry, they have been told they're dumb, they've experienced racism, they've been written off.
Police officer Anthony Ward knows how easily he could have landed on the other side of the law.
Because I grew up around drugs. As a kid, I was just really frustrated and angry. My mother started doing cocaine and eventually crack cocaine. She would take stuff that she had gotten us for Christmas, take it to the pawn shop. I could have just said, okay, I'm gonna accept this culture and become another statistic.
Instead, he fought to escape, and Odyssey gave him the tools.
Because I always wanted to go to school, but I knew I didn't have the money. I was like, free school, like, bring it on. The most important word to me was free. Free meant the barrier wasn't there. So now I could be and do what I wanted to do. Anybody looking at me, I want them to see that no matter what happens, be the darkest, deepest pit you can get out of it. So make sure we do a good job, okay?
Many of them lead very complicated, very stressful lives where just getting through the day can really wear a person down. That's not the usual student we see at UW-Madison.
Beautiful.
They need to feel that somebody cares.
It's not hard to feel that at every Odyssey class.
It's a place that provides child care.
How would you go to school without child care?
There she is.
Every day before class, we have food to eat. Not snacks, not, oh, thanks for the Triscuits. I'm talking straight up meals.
We help students when they're down, when they face eviction, when life circumstances threaten to get in their way.
It has a way of making you see the potential and the hope in yourself. You can do it. We believe in you.
We run the class like a family, and the students get close to each other, they encourage each other, and there is love in that room.
But make no mistake, this is an academically rigorous course.
We read parts of the Constitution. We read from the Federalist Papers.
The allegory of the cave is challenging material. The sentences are sententious.
Will he not fancy that the shadows which he formerly saw are truer than the objects which are now shown to him?
Being in that class for a lot of people was the first time they ever felt like they were smart.
Everybody was hungry to learn.
Coming up, the inspiration for the Odyssey Project can be traced back a generation. Learn how two college students who lifted themselves out of poverty set the course that's changing lives today.
Okay. So I do encourage you to watch the rest of that video. It goes on to interview both my parents, tells their story, and then shows a lot more of class, including our graduation ceremony at the end, and kind of follows the two stories, Anthony, the one that was shown as a police officer, and Billy, who just lacks a few more classes to have her UW-Madison degree, and her son graduated in May from UW. So I want to show one other video. It's a more recent one, just done this summer. It's a 1-minute interview. It mentioned on the documentary that we had childcare, and we've always had childcare as part of what we do with Odyssey. But I also noticed that some of the older children were hanging around the library. They're too old for our childcare, but somehow, it would seem like a wasted opportunity. And so what we have done for the last 3 years now is have a program called Odyssey Jr. So every Wednesday night, like tomorrow night in South Madison, we will have a class of 30 adults that's earning college credit from UW. And in 3 different locations nearby in South Madison, we have 55 children ages 2 to 18. So we have the little ones in the Head Start room, age 2 to kindergarten. We have grades 1 to 5 in the Space Place, and age 6 to 12 in the library, because now the adults, we meet in the partnership space. So we kind of take over South Madison, and whole families are going home excited about learning. So what you're going to see in this video is a 12-year-old who's in Odyssey Jr. interviewing her mom about Odyssey.
This is my mom, Aisha, and she's in the Odyssey program. Mom, how do you feel about the Odyssey program, and how has it helped you so far?
The Odyssey program has given me strength, belief. I have belief in myself that I can conquer anything They have opened up so many doors that I did not know were out there for young people going back to school to further their education. Odyssey is a wonderful place to be.
When you first started the Odyssey program, how did you feel?
Nervous. I didn't have an education beyond high school, so going back to college, taking college courses, it was like, am I ready for this? Am I ready for this? But I can definitely tell you our instructor, Emily, and all of our teachers will push you for greatness.
How do you feel about Odyssey Jr?
Odyssey Jr is wonderful. I mean, a lot of the times I would not know, I wouldn't be able to come to school. I wouldn't be able to attend regular classes without having childcare for my children. Thank goodness Odyssey does offer that. So I come to class, my children go to class, we have a ball, they look forward to Wednesdays every week. Mom, is it Wednesday yet? Is it Wednesday yet? So definitely Odyssey Jr is a great thing.
Okay, thank you. So the Odyssey, thank you for helping. I have a terrible track record. The last time I tried to show a film, it shut down the power in the whole room. So this is what I try to have somebody else, and then if things go wrong, it's not my problem. So let me give you a little more information about the Odyssey Project, and I do want to open it up for questions early because that's my favorite part, is the back and forth. So the Odyssey Project, we are now in our 15th year. And as I mentioned in the film, it did take a while to get the permission and raise the funding to start it. And I think one of the things that I was running into was a mindset against the idea that it was going to work. And it was kind of ironic too, but there were some administrators who were so skeptical and really made it difficult for me to start it and kind of blocked the way. And then when it was clear it was succeeding, and it was kind of a photo opportunity on diversity, they were just really eager to talk to reporters, and one of them was quoted as saying, "We go where the people are." And where was that when I was trying to get it going? So I have learned to fight some battles that I started. Maybe I should back this up too, because this is about the Wisconsin idea, and I have been a professor here at UW for over 30 years. My pathway into non-traditional lifelong learning, which Odyssey is part of, but just a small part of my overall picture here at UW, came accidentally. In other words, I was trained for a regular academic job with a PhD. I came back to Madison because this is where I had family. I had 2 little children at the time and wanted to be closer to family. Took a part-time lectureship in the English department, and then a job opened up in what was then UW Extension. And it was going to be a professor of English, but mostly teaching through the mail, independent learning, and a few non-credit classes for people who just wanted to learn. It seemed like a sort of second-class job, something that I would take while I was waiting for the real job in the English department to open up. And what I found is that I fell in love with non-traditional learners. So I had a student who was 106 and still wanted a handout. I had students in the Coast Guard or in prison or who had such richness of life experience. And to me, that kind of teaching, it reminded me of why I went into literature in the first place, the power that literature has to jump off the page and into your own life. And so Odyssey, in many ways, is part of that. I feel that I have had the best discussions of William Blake and Emily Dickinson and many other writers out in South Madison, because the students there are speaking from the heart, and they're making it their own. Anthony, who was on the film, the one that talked about how he was glad it wasn't just Triscuits for the meal, but a real meal, and it showed him in a school working with children. But in a collection that we have of alumni writing, he took Macbeth and set it in Chicago. We have others who have taken, when we read Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, who will take Ebenezer Scrooge and turn him into modern-day landlord, or a healthcare insurance provider who's turning down your claim. It's I think one of the things that can happen in non-traditional learning is that you find that your life experience, and many of the students in my class have had extremely difficult backgrounds. I have one student in my class right now who was raised in 32 foster homes. And so when we read a story or a poem, his take on it is going to be different than the student sitting next to him who is here illegally from Mexico and is in our class and is worried about deportation. And her take on it will be different than a student who is here as a refugee from Syria waiting political asylum. So when you have a mixture in your classroom of ages, and we've gone from 18 to 71, my 71-year-old made the dean's list after graduating from Odyssey, and she's now 81 and still learning. But when you have a mixture of ages and backgrounds, the discussions are so much richer. I forget where I was going with that, but I guess what I was trying to say is that I didn't necessarily train for a job that would use the Wisconsin idea every day. But I am glad that I found my way there, because I think it's something that makes me eager to get up every day. And I don't always see that in my colleagues who are kind of more trapped in a traditional publish and perish academic, teach the same class for students who want grades. It's just a different environment. One of the students that you saw on the film who was saying, "I have been redeemed," that was a piece of what he read at his graduation. And I just wanted to read what he said, because it gives you, again, an example of the background of some of the students. He called it a life-altering journey. "I was born in prison. My mom was in prison while she was pregnant with me, and she died during labor as I was born. Because of the lifestyle I chose, I was in and out of prison or jail all my life from the time I was 12 years old. In 1997, I was born again and began a journey with Jesus. In 2011, I began a different kind of journey called the Odyssey Project, setting me free from a life of ignorance and illiteracy. My journey in and through Odyssey has been breathtaking and life-altering, and I am blessed beyond my imagination. I am in Odyssey, and Odyssey is in me. I went from a drug-addicted, alcoholic, drug-dealing, and gang-banging thug to a hard-working man of God who visits and preaches to those who are behind bars. Hallelujah." Eugene is now a minister. He is going back into Fox Lake and other prisons. And we have actually a program now to take our Odyssey course materials into some of the prisons in Wisconsin. And Gene Faraka has been going along with some of the restorative justice folks from the First Congregational Church to take materials like Plato's Allegory of the Cave and other pieces that we do in Odyssey and have some of the same kinds of discussions behind bars. That transformation where you can have someone who was in prison now ministering to men in prison is something that we see with lots of our students, and I think it's what gets me the most excited. I think I caught most of you when you came in with a bookmark, and if you look on the bookmark, and if you don't have one, there's some extras up on the table. You'll see it says Odyssey Project, Odyssey Jr, and then Onward Odyssey. The picture under Onward Odyssey is of Josephine, who came here as a refugee from Sudan. She graduated from our Odyssey class of 2008, went on to Madison College, then got her bachelor's, which is what it shows here, from UW-Madison. And she just in May got her master's of social work from UW-Madison. She also, during a part of her journey, became a U.S. citizen. We helped her with the fee, because even if you pass your test, unless you pay, I think it was $680 to the Department of Homeland Security, you can't become a citizen. So, and that kept her from being qualified for any financial aid. So Odyssey was part of her journey, not just during class, but all the way, and she just showed up in class last week to try to serve as a mentor to our current students. But she's now working as a social worker helping refugee families like she once was. I have women who were victims of domestic abuse who are now helping women in shelters. And I think that's the part that becomes really inspiring, where you have a course that gets people excited about learning, moves them from homelessness to having a master's degree and a career that they never thought possible, and then you see them trying to help others. We had one student who told me that she graduated from a Madison high school memorial, and this was several decades ago. But her guidance counselor said, "You're not college material." And she talks about seeing the white students in her class preparing to go to college and feeling bad that somehow she wasn't college material. So, and she told that story. I was able to take one student with me to be recorded for the StoryCorps project for Library of Congress. So I took Char with me, and her story is now part of the Library of Congress, talking about how she had been made to feel so bad and to not try, and how with Odyssey, when she saw a brochure at the library that said start college for free, that she felt, you know, in her 40s that now she maybe could be college material. She also went through our special education teacher training program that we offered as part of Onward Odyssey, and she's now working in the school district helping special needs children. And I just wish the guidance counselor that had told her she wasn't college material was still alive so she could go back and say, I'm working in the schools and I am college material and I'm on my way to a bachelor's degree. So I think with Odyssey, I learn every day that I teach the course from the students who are with it. And it opens your eyes not just to what we're reading, but also to various forms of injustice. I have been thrilled to have as many partners and volunteers as we do because our program is growing and obviously we need more and more resources to support the students. And I guess I should point out that one of the reasons that I didn't want to have a Clementi course here in Madison, which is how it originally was proposed to me, is because of my parents' journey at Berea College. I didn't want just a great works class where you read Plato and Shakespeare and then you're done. To me, my parents would never have gotten out of poverty without a 4-year free liberal arts education. And so more than half of our budget is going to help our graduates keep going in school. I always say if I were married to Bill Gates, and I love my husband, but he's not Bill Gates, but if I were, I would start a free 4-year college here in Madison that was designed for those getting out of generational poverty. It would have built-in housing, counseling, tutoring, childcare, and it would be non-parochial. In other words, Berea, I guess one of the ironies to me is that Berea does a better job of being a public institution and serving the needs of a greater audience than UW, which I think was ranked, what was it, 116th out of 130 in terms of, oh, here it is. Okay. The University of Wisconsin-Madison ranked pretty far down the list, 116th of 179 on the New York Times College Access Index, which seeks to measure economic diversity at top U.S. colleges. So I think we are not living up to the Wisconsin idea at the University of Wisconsin if we are trying to serve all the families of the state and make it possible for people to have access to high-quality college education. I want to share something written by a student. And we have a student newsletter. One of the things, oh, that's another thing that I wanted to change about the original model. The Clementi model had history, philosophy, art, history, and literature. No music, no arts. And for me, maybe because I'm a former music major, it just seems silly to leave out music. And also, I feel that when students are asked to create their own art, it somehow changes the dynamic. And that's why in class they will write the blues or write a poem in sonnet style or write editorials that get sent to the paper. And we have a student newsletter where they see their photos and their writing in print, and it gives them practice also reading aloud. And there's a sense of pride for many when it may be the first time that they've ever seen their writing in print. So this is the wrong oracle. That's fine. The one I was going to read was from last week, but I brought one from last year instead. But the one from last week was a student who's 57 and said that when he went to the Union South, because we travel by bus to get their photo IDs, that it was the first time he felt he belonged on this campus, that he had traveled here with his daughter or sometimes been on a bus passing by, but never felt that sense of belonging. And simply getting that UW ID card, which they have for 2 semesters, made him feel that he belonged and that his daughter, too, could think about college. And that's one of the things that we're seeing as well, is that there's a generational effect. That if children see their parents talking about college and doing homework, they start thinking that way too. We have one of our graduates from Odyssey Jr., who was 8 years old when her grandmother took our class, and she was in our child care. She went through Odyssey Jr., and she's now a sophomore here at UW-Madison wanting to be a lawyer. And I think, you know, the more times that we can reach a whole family, the more impact that we have. I think what I'd like to do is close before I open it for questions, because I'd like to do as many questions as we can. I'm going to share something written by a graduate of our very first class. Denise writes, and she came out of the Chicago housing projects, actually did not learn to read until they sort of just pushed her through school. She had severe dyslexia, which wasn't diagnosed until later. And when she came to Madison, she went to the library, the South Madison Library, started with first grade readers, and then asked the librarians for help when she hit a word that she didn't know. And she worked her way all the way up to novels. When she told me about that at her interview, I knew this is a student that was hungry to learn. So Denise writes, I would never have thought that classes in the humanities would change my life forever. I mean forever without exaggeration, because writing, art history, American history, literature, and philosophy transported me into a new world where written words came alive and made magic inside my heart. The journey started in September with William Blake's poems from Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience. We learned about a chimney sweeper who was a little child sold into slavery by his parents. As Professor Emily read the poem, tears rolled down my face. As an African American, I understand the bitterness of slavery. The poem went on to light a fire within my soul. I have been victorious in freedom. My freedom included wanting to better myself through education. This was the first time I realized how words can move you forever, even if the original writer is gone from this world. Wow, the transformation had started, and there was no turning back from this course. The eloquence of the students in the program, I think, is the best testimony for why this program should be there. If, by the way, you're interested in, just in a couple days, in supporting the program, meeting some of the students and staff, I do want to invite you to something that's in its third year, and that's our annual benefit called the Nite of the Living Humanities. And there are invitations up here on the table. You'll see students dressed as Abraham Lincoln, Socrates, the Bronte sisters, and so on. I had 2 costume fails so far. The first year I was Emily Dickinson, but was told I looked like Princess Leia from Star Wars. And last year I was Jane Austen, but someone from the Jane Austen Society who was in attendance said that my bonnet looked more like Martha Washington and it wasn't authentic. So you'll have to come this year to see how I do, and costumes are optional. But I think what we're trying to do with the Nite of the Living Humanities, which is from 5 to 7 at the University Club on Thursday, what we're trying to do with it is to celebrate what I was talking about, which is that power of the humanities to somehow still be with us. We can feel ourselves in the presence of Walt Whitman or Martin Luther King or a musician, and we'll have somebody coming, I think, as Mahalia Jackson and singing. But it's sort of celebrating that transformational power that happens when you encounter great figures from the past. So I do hope that you come to that. Also that you visit the website, look at the documentary in full, and try to find ways that you can help us. We have whole teams of people now helping to provide meals. The first year I did the cooking, which got old fast, but we're now feeding 90 people every Wednesday. We have volunteer tutors and mentors. We have people who volunteer to have fundraisers at their house. We have people giving financial advice or legal services or social work help, and or simply finding someone they know to tell about the program and encourage them to support us. So with that, I'd like to open it up for questions. Yes. Oh, okay.
Are you working to establish a branch program?
I hope this isn't too loud. Is this loud enough to be heard? Are you working to replicate the program in Milwaukee?
I'm glad you asked the question about Milwaukee. because one of the things that happened early on when Jean Faraca told me about the Clementi course, and I started looking into should I start one like that, because it's kind of like a package where they have it ready to go. You have to get your curriculum approved by Bard College, and it's a whole program that you can do. I decided not to go, and there was a grant at that time with some money to start a Clementi course. Decided not to do it that way, but to instead build it into the University of Wisconsin, because to me it seemed, why give Bard College credit when we have this so-called Wisconsin idea? Why not make it for Wisconsin credit and help students keep going here? So, and I didn't have the time to just take that money and run with it, and so we passed on it. The money for that grant went to Milwaukee, and there was a program at UW-Milwaukee, a Clementi course, that started a year before I started the program here, and it folded. It was, and the guy who ran it was terrific in classics there, but it folded after 2.5 years for lack of funding, because the problem is that if you don't build something into the institution that you're at, and we got the support of Letters in Science, the Chancellor's office, you got the credit worked out, all that. If we don't build it into the institution, it's hard to sustain it. And just the cost for childcare and tuition and textbooks, it was difficult for them to keep going. So the Milwaukee program also, the other thing that bothered me when I heard about the Clementi course is the dropout rate of 50%. I was told if you start with 30, you're lucky if you graduate 15. The Milwaukee program graduated 12. Racine started a program and they graduated 6. When you have those kinds of numbers, you often can't get funders to come back because it looks as if it's a lot of investment. I think one of the reasons our Madison program graduates almost 100%, we usually will graduate 29 of our 30 or sometimes 30 of our 30 with all the credits, is because we have built in a separate nonprofit to help with emergencies like transportation or things that threaten homelessness. And the other thing is that we simply push hard to keep our students with me. And students will know that if they're in the hospital, I'm going to show up with flowers and homework. I mean, it's true. And I will track them down at their workplace, or if they're depressed and not getting out of bed, we don't just let them fail. Because I think one of the things that happens in programs that are for at-risk adults is that sometimes there are these barriers and obstacles that happen, and the thing that you want least of all is to reinforce that sense of failure. So I forget, the question was Milwaukee. Yes. I would like to see the program spread elsewhere. They started a summer program like it in UW-Waukesha. Is that right? And then I would like to see it in Beloit. There's no reason Beloit College faculty couldn't do something. They've got a low-income population right there. We do have, I've spoken at Stanford and at Middle State Tennessee University and in Illinois, and there's a lot of interest. The problem is that it's extremely labor-intensive and expensive. And I think this is where I do feel that we're lucky to have the Wisconsin idea, because I feel like if you have a school that has that built into its mission and its concept of itself, it's easier to make a case for what I'm doing. I think it's harder if you go outside of the state and try to sell this idea of investing a lot of resources in a program that seems contrary to what we think is going to work.
Emily, you mentioned several dimensions of what sounds like community organizing to me. And it seems to me that what you've learned, which people who try to put the Wisconsin idea into practice, is exactly that the idea requires creating a framework in which it will work. This is not just writing in and saying, I will teach History 101 and we will use this textbook and so forth. And I'd like for you to comment on whether you've been able to share lessons learned from the organizing side of this with others, because your story is not a unique one. The ones you just told about programs that have started with a grant and didn't make it any farther than the grant. So just curious about your perspective on that.
Well, I think early on we realized that we wanted to hold the class off campus, and that was important because a lot of the students that I'm working with have talked about feeling like there's a drawbridge up on Park Street. You know, when I teach Odyssey, it's just on the other end of Park Street, but it can feel like miles away. And there is also a suspicion of the university in terms of university faculty are only interested in the so-called community if they can use it for their research and get published and get attention. That they will take that data, you know, and use it for their own personal gain. And I think that was part of the Wisconsin idea discussion too, that you're not supposed to just hoard that knowledge and use it for personal gain, but actually have a concept of public good. And so one of the things that became clear early on is that we had to work to combat a mindset in South Madison in particular, but just sort of in the community in general, that the university really wasn't interested in being open. I was shocked when I did a radio show, one of the University of the Air shows I did had to do with the history of Madison and how it was designed. And I didn't know until then that just geographically, the whole concept was that you would keep the blue-collar workers on the east side so that if you were a professor or lawyer or doctor, you could live on the west side, go to work downtown, go home, and never see poverty, never see blue-collar folks. That there would be this kind of segregated city. And I don't know, there's a lot of things like that where the more you learn, the more shocked you become. And I do think that one of my goals is to have enough of my students graduate from the program and become the professors teaching the course. We do try to bring in a lot of guests as well that can serve as role models and inspiration to the students in the program. But I don't know if that answered your question, but. Okay.
I had looked at the film before coming to class. And at one point, it said that there were 30 spots with usually about 100 people applying. Mm-hmm. So my question is, how do you choose your student?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what students do when they apply for the program is they fill out an application that includes their background information, income level, and then they write an essay about why they want to be in the class, and then they come for an interview. Some students never show up for that interview, so that takes, or by the time the interview happens, they've somehow disappeared and their phone's disconnected. So that takes care of some of the ones who apply. Some of the students need more work with English, and then I steer them to the literacy network or another program first, and they can reapply. What I have done is to look for students with that hunger to learn and with obstacles that you just wouldn't believe that have gotten in their way. It's probably one of the few times where the worse you've had it, the better it is for you. And then because I can't stand the notion of turning anyone away, what we have been doing as well is with about 20 or 30 qualified students who could have been in the class, I give them vouchers to Madison College for $250 each to start at least one credit of or some kind of a non-credit course while they're waiting to reapply. So it's sort of, and try to make it clear that we're not the only pathway, that there are a lot of other programs that can help get them started on college. We have some people who apply where their income is too high or where they've already had significantly more credits than others. So and I give priority to first generation college students.
Very interested to hear what Odyssey currently has for paid and volunteer staffing.
Well, I'm lucky because as of 4 years ago, I have, he was started as a writing instructor. He actually started as he was finishing his PhD as one of our tutors. And I noticed he was supposed to just be working 5 hours a week, but he kept coming to class and showing up everywhere because he kind of fell in love with the program. And then he became after he got his PhD, our writing instructor, assistant director, and now associate director, which means I could get sick. And it also means that he is offering a class for our alumni with more training in writing. So we do have an associate director now, which is great. And then as of this summer, we also have a development and community partnership director. And she's been helping to write important grants, including one that was from the National Endowment for the Humanities. She started working part-time with us on some special funding and just came on board full-time. But the National Endowment for the Humanities gave us a $100,000 challenge grant for our Odyssey Jr program. It was the only program in Wisconsin that was given this college access program for youth grant. The thing was we were supposed to raise $100,000 in 2 years to get that match. But as you know, with the administration change, there was talk of eliminating the National Endowment for the Humanities. So we were told, try to do it in 2 months. And we did. And I did not feel relieved until we got that money actually out of Washington and into our bank here in Madison. So we raised the money for that. The only problem is, and many, if any of you are in the sort of fundraising nonprofit area, you'll understand that, is a lot of our donors who pitched in to help us with that did that rather than contributing to our adult class. So now we're kind of working on those funds. Our benefit on Thursday is going to be for the Onward Odyssey, because we see our biggest area of need, that we have so many students who are going on in college. I think it's something like 80% of our students continue on to take more college. Many of them do get financial aid, but it doesn't cover the whole show. So that's where we really are pushing. And then we have all the other teachers in the program are now volunteering their times, like Craig Werner and Marshall Cook and others are volunteer. What I've done is to take any prize, teaching award, honorarium, any of that, and donate it, because I guess maybe it's that feeling of not wanting personal gain from, I feel there's something almost sacred about that. If you're doing work that is meant to benefit people, there'd be something really terrible to profit from it. So I've put that money, and then my father, after my mother's death, started 2 endowments in her name, so we give out memorial scholarships in my mother's name. And we have volunteers who are helping us with meals and tutoring. We do have some paid staff with our Odyssey Jr program now, too, part-time.
Is that on? Yeah, I can't tell. So I just so appreciate and applaud all that you're doing, and I've watched it over a couple, well, not 2 decades, but almost. And I've wondered, being someone who was associated with the Department of English and Sociology, and I also did my teaching and research on social aspects of just ordinary language, how people talk to each other. When I see your video, when I watched it at home, and when I listened to you talk, I realized that the blues is part of what, it's a form of art that you elevate through the teaching. And you also said that for your education beyond arts and humanities is something that you value and you see that is important for them. And I'm just curious how, I think I'm just fascinated with how it is that I feel that there's something special about Shakespeare and the great books, and that pulls me. And at the same time, there's a part of me that wants people to see the art and the poetics, in the poetry in their own talk, in their own communities. And I just don't know what you might say about that.
Oh, I wish you had come to class on October 4th, because what we did that night, and I've done that every year, is I brought my dad and his keyboard. So my father was a research scientist, but he also plays jazz and always has, and improvises. So he brought his keyboard into class. And what we looked at is the close relationship between speech and music and literature, and in particular how American culture didn't really become uniquely American until you had this blend. So he starts by playing hymns, and you cannot tell the difference between a British hymn, a German hymn. It all kind of sounds the same. And he'll play Faith of Our Fathers and Mighty Fortress, and it's all kind of regular. And if you're looking through a hymnal, it's really hard to tell which European country, or if it's American hymn. Lowell Mason, who wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb, is considered the father of American church music. He wrote all these hymns. They don't sound much different from British hymns and German hymns. So we play that. Then we do Go Down Moses. And I bring one of my alumni sings with the Mount Zion Choir. So she comes in and sings with my dad. And it knocks you out of your seat. And you've got this powerful minor key. You've got, blues notes. You've got sliding all over, irregular rhythms. And it's just so different. And then when she does Joshua at the Battle of Jericho, you can't not snap your fingers and tap your feet. It's syncopated rhythm, coming from Africa. We also do ragtime and show the relationship between Mozart and how that sounds, and then ragtime. Look at boogie woogie and jazz. I have students talk, and then we try to play music that sounds like that speech. And we look at improvisation and how if you're playing jazz, if you just punch any note on the keyboard, there's no mistake because you can turn it into something. Then we look at, we do that as we start Frederick Douglass's slave narrative, because in one of the early chapters of his narrative about escaping slavery, he talks about how it wasn't until he heard music, until he heard the sorrow songs of the slaves, that he first became aware of the dehumanizing power of slavery. The fact that hearing in the music something ineffable, something that was powerful, that's where he traced his beginnings. And so then we looked at Douglass as an orator, and also how if you deny an entire people the right to read and write, because it was illegal to teach slaves to read and write, that music and oratory become powerful methods of conversation. So anyway, that was just like part of one class. But when we get to Langston Hughes in the second semester, we also will be bringing in music as well. And I agree with you that there's something, and one of the texts that students talk about over and over again is Plato's allegory of the cave, and they love doing lines from Shakespeare and the classics, and the fact that we don't dumb it down. At the same time, I wanted to add in more literature and philosophy and art that was from not dead white men. I mean, sort of that we wanted a more diverse curriculum too. So we spend a lot of time on Frida Kahlo and Romare Bearden and others, and look at what Romare Bearden did with Homer's Odyssey. And so I think both. And what I didn't like about the title of Earl Shoris's book, Riches for the Poor, the title, Riches for the Poor, implies almost a kind of colonial approach to education. Here we come with our Plato and Shakespeare, you lucky poor people. And I would argue that when my mother came from the hills of Tennessee and arrived at Berea College, no, she didn't recognize Beethoven's Fifth because nobody had ever played it for her, but she had perfect pitch and she had gifts. And so one of my favorite quotes from an Odyssey student is one who said that the program helped him unwrap his gifts and rewrite the story of his life.
I'm just curious, and it probably would be interesting for people here to know, what is the budget, like the annual budget for Odyssey these days? And I know we can contribute if we have some cash on hand, so what is the budget?
So the budget is complicated in the sense that it depends on which part of my university salary gets counted, which overhead and all that. I can tell you that we pay for the tuition for 6 credits for 30 students per year, textbooks, childcare, things like that. Roughly, I'd say that the main core course is about $120,000 for those 30 adults to get through. Then we had add in Odyssey Jr. for maybe another $75,000, and then for Onward Odyssey, maybe another $250,000 after that. That's per year.
So somebody doesn't even have to be Bill Gates to help you out a lot.
The way I see our funding, and I guess, we do have now some funding from the university, from the Chancellor's Office, from Letters and Science, and from the Division of Continuing Studies. And I'm allowed to do this as my teaching. My English department teaching is teaching Odyssey since it's credits in English literature. So that helps a lot, that becomes part of what I can do. But then we have grants from EVU, Brittingham, Anonymous. We have little grants from, I shouldn't say little, they all put piece together, from American Family, from Alliant Energy, from Magic Pebble. There's a whole list. And then we've got about 1,200 donors. And, $5 helps. We had one person who held a reception at her house, so it was just a 2-hour thing. She invited all her friends and neighbors. I brought some students, and they had some donated music and appetizers. And they raised $15,000 and 132 donors in that 1 2-hour event. And that's back to your sort of grassroots activism. I see our program as something that works, but I see it as limited by lack of resources, lack of staff. What keeps me up at night is I can't follow up with all the students. When I'm watching the film there, I'm seeing students where they were in my office this morning, or I know that I haven't talked to them in a year and that they were struggling in school. And it's the, right now we're in the process of hiring a part-time social work counselor because I'm getting called from students who are depressed, who are facing eviction, and I can give hugs, but I'm not trained. So, we need more help, and that's why I said I was hoping that everyone in this room would go out the door and do something. And sometimes it can be writing a check, but often it's finding someone else, finding, Brennan's before it closed donated fruit. Some companies will give us a discount on, I had one guy who worked for a publishing company and he donated art books for 12 years until he retired. So you never know what somebody, we had a dentist, neighbor of Jean Faraka, and we had students who weren't smiling because they had lost teeth, and she did pro bono dental work. So, yeah.
I'd like to ask a question. So you talked that about there being some challenges initially, some people who were hard to convince. But then you've also given some examples of how University of Wisconsin-Madison has worked to your advantage, in particular the notion of University of Wisconsin being associated with the Wisconsin idea, maybe being more a sort of fertile ground for this. Could you describe your experiences on the positive side? What were the things that allowed this to especially get established and then now to grow? And when you said 80% of the students about go on to actually get a degree.
Oh, I didn't say, I'm sorry, not to get a degree, take more college.
Take more college.
I wish with a degree.
I know, but that's still astounding, an astounding success rate. So what were aspects of the campus here that worked in your favor, do you think?
Well, I think one of the reasons that it's difficult to replicate this program at another university would be that there are not too many professors who are allowed to have the kind of crazy job I have, where what I had before Odyssey included, I still am doing it. I teach a book group at the downtown library, where it's mostly retired folks, but we just sit around and talk about books, and or I can teach in a retirement center or an elder hostel or through the mail, or so my job was already 80% outreach, 20% regular English department. And so I think having the freedom to work with non-traditional students is huge in terms of time. Because if you tried to do this at another school and you had a professor who had a teaching load, and then had to try to do this on top of it, it would not be possible to do the follow-up with students that's happening. So I see one of the big pluses is just simply being allowed to do that as my job. And also, at the time that I thought about making it a Clementi course, they've changed the rules now, but they had an age cap of 35. Well, no way was I going to have an age cap for this program, and some of our very best students have been in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. I had one who got his bachelor's degree at age 60, and they were doing these little speeches at a ceremony. The guy before him was talking about how he had taken 5 years to get his bachelor's, and then Tom got up and said, "Well, I'm on the 40-year plan," and But I guess this lifelong learning, it is part of what we do, and that we've always done. When I taught a regular class, it was a class of 400 on campus. I decided to have an outreach section with, so that older students could attend along with my freshmen. And it was one of those teacher conference days, and I brought my children to class. And my 6-year-old looked around and said, "Mom," because she saw these gray-haired people in the room, she said, "Did some of your students fail a lot of grades?"
Mine's a simple question. You said in your talk earlier that you would advertise or through the library. Is that the only place? That's how students find out about it? Or how do you get them to, say, "Hey, I want to join your class"?
Yeah, so we did use the library, and I think a library is a great place because people who go to the library are often ones who want to read and they're trying to do something more with their life. So we put flyers there and posters. We also put flyers out in Head Start, St. Vinny's, the Y that's on the square, other places like that. Quite frankly, there's also been a lot of news media coverage. There was a cover story in Isthmus and TV spots, and some students will now see on Facebook someone they know who's graduating, and credits the Odyssey Project. We also have word of mouth and a lot of relatives who apply. This year, of my 30, 3 of them are actually children of someone who graduated from Odyssey. And my 71-year-old, who's now 80, her granddaughter went through our program. So there's also kind of a family effect. I don't give priority to family members, but it's one of the ways that they find out.
Any other questions? I had one more question. So you talked about how the diversity of experience is a big factor in the lives of many of these people, and also the lives of the classroom as you move forward. Do you have any way to assess the effect of that sort of experience on people that don't have such a diverse experience? In other words, this is a selected group of individuals. How much crossover is there with people who maybe had things quite easy as opposed to this? Is there anything like that? And if not, is that an objective for those people who leave and come to the campus, in your view?
Okay, I'm not sure I've got all of that, but I know that while they're in the program, students talk about that the diversity in the room is one of the most powerful things for them, because it shows them that they're not the only ones with struggles. That they never thought, right now I've got students from Peru. Last year I had students from Trinidad, Syria, Iraq. Just listening to their stories, broadens our view. I think one of the big problems we have is that when students graduate from Odyssey, and they have these Wednesday nights and talk about feeling like a family, and then it's almost like falling off a cliff, and they sometimes go into classrooms where they don't feel that warmth and connection. A student from my second year, she took a summer class on communication arts at Madison College, and the teacher announced that he didn't want them to write about feelings or families, and that if they didn't staple their paper, it would get an F. So she showed up the true story, she showed up in my office crying. I gave her a stapler. She took it to class so everybody could staple their paper. And, but it's another student. I got a call from an English teacher at Madison College who said, I have one of your Odyssey graduates in my class. Actually, she was on the film, and she now has her master's from UW. But anyway, this was right after she graduated from Odyssey. She was taking a Madison College English class. The teacher said, she's challenging everything I say. And I said, oh, that's great. And she said, no, it isn't. And one of the things we do is actually encourage our students. It's sort of the Socratic method. It's all challenging. We invite that. And sometimes when they go on to another class, if it's not a good match with the teacher or with classmates, or maybe they're the only African-American student in the class, it's a real bump. And that's why in my dream 4-year college, we would keep the cohort together. We are building more classes for them to take together, trying to find, for example, a math class or a Spanish class or something where we can have a group taking it at the same time and encouraging each other. I would say that the university here profits when my students from Odyssey come here, because they change the discourse.
So your last point, you've just named the Posse program in many ways, and the power of that. Mm-hmm. Could you speak more to that point? And because I totally agree with what you're saying, and well, please.
I guess one of the problems I have is people will say, so what do your Odyssey students want to do? And as if they're sort of a whole block. And because I've got students with completely different career goals, wanting to be a nurse, or maybe someone who doesn't particularly want to go to Moore College but wants to publish a chapbook of poetry, all different kinds of goals. I think sometimes it's hard for me to describe them as a block with the same needs. What I'm hoping to do, now that we have over 400 graduates of our program, is to find within that 400 a group that is all interested in nursing, and then to steer them into a class together where they can encourage each other. The writing course that we now offer for an additional 3 credits, that introduces Odyssey alumni from different years, and they get to know each other and form a group. We also have a partnership now with Slow Food UW and Food Justice and Growing Power, and are offering a food course for our alumni where they get more college credit while also learning about food injustice. So I'd like to build on that. That's one of the sad things, is having just a 2-semester program and then everybody scatters. But it's hard because they have families and jobs, and it's not the usual kind of easy to keep everybody together kind of thing. I do want to say one other thing, which is that I see success, and we just went through an evaluation process, which was great because now I've got data which satisfies lots of people. You know, you can say numbers and stuff. But there are some things that can't be measured, and maybe some of you will have ideas for how I can show that. For example, I have a barber who went through the program. He has not gone on to take more college, so he's not going to show up as part of that 81% or something. It looks like he hasn't done anything more academically. But he turned his barbershop into a kind of cultural hub, put pictures of Malcolm X and Frederick Douglass on the wall, and says that he talks to the boys whose hair he's doing to talk to them about staying in school, and he gives free haircuts on graduation day, and he got an Unsung Hero Award from the community. Now, on any statistical analysis, he doesn't help me at all, but I know he's a success. I view that as a success. I view it as a success if a person who went through our program just says she's reading more to her children, and that she's talking to the guidance counselor to make sure they get into college-bound classes. You know, or if they just say that they're happier and reading more. We had one, you know, we were trying to show that our program encourages greater literacy, more reading. We had one student who said he's reading less after Odyssey than he did before it, because before he was in prison and had lots of time to read. And so again, not helpful with my evaluation, but he now has a full-time job. You know, and you can see him pictured as Abraham Lincoln there, but we had one student who was doodling in class. I said, Stanley, you know, that's really good. And he now has a graphic design degree and works full-time as a designer. So you never know, but he doesn't have enough time to read.
Emily, you've described a fantastically successful program. I'm pretty sure Bill Gates is watching tonight, and we hope that he contacts you. Please join me in thanking Dr. Auerbach.